Many times before I go to watch a movie, sometimes I'll open the newspaper and look to see if you've given an endorsement. What exactly do you do?
Basically, what I do is spend a lot of time watching movies and then talking and writing about them. I'm a film critic. I'm the chief film critic for the New York Post. I'm also the host of a TV show called Sneak Previews, which is broadcast on now 211 stations through the public broadcasting system. And I've just got to warn you a little bit about those ads that you see in the newspaper, because one of the things that happens to every critic, and happens to this critic a lot, is they quote you out of context. I mean, they will take a movie which you haven't liked, where you've said something perhaps that can be a little bit misinterpreted or misarranged, and use that. One famous example was I had reviewed a movie called Intersection with Richard Gere and Sharon Stone. And I said, Richard Gere is terribly miscast playing a suave, sexy, intelligent architect. And what they did is they did a quote where it said, Richard Gere, ... suave, sexy, intelligent. and I'd given the movie 1 star. So they can do all sorts of tricks to you in the advertisements.
Now, your rating scale is 0 stars to how many stars?
4 stars.
4 stars.
Yeah. We have a limited galaxy here. There's not, we don't have, it's not like the Milky Way. 4 stars is as much as you get. And actually, I recently gave a movie 4 stars, Miracle on 34th Street, which is a wonderful film. And it promptly opened and failed at the box office, which shows you just how much clout American critics can have.
What's an example of a movie that got no stars from you, a movie that we would know?
Well, I gave no stars to a movie called Surf Ninjas, which tried to combine the very worst of California and Japanese culture. It was about ninja surfers, obviously. I don't know if it even made it to Japan. I certainly hope not. That got 0 stars. I gave 1 star to the new Star Trek movie, which is just an appalling waste of time, and it's doing very well at the box office. But one of the things I asked about that movie is I asked the question, why don't they ever wear seatbelts on the Enterprise? I mean, in this film, there are, honest to God, 12 different scenes where you see people on the bridge of the Enterprise being bounced around. They're thrown out of their seats. Now, even a Hyundai today comes equipped with a shoulder harness. Why not this intergalactic cruiser that travels at warp speeds? You know, why not some kind of seatbelts? It makes no sense, but neither does anything else in that movie.
How many movies do you review in a typical year?
Far too many. In a typical year, over 300. And you know, it's one of those things where you begin to see your mind turning into Swiss cheese because it becomes difficult to remember the names of movies sometimes. You say, oh yeah, that was the one with Robin Williams where he plays a broken down old football player who wants to replay his big, oh yeah, it's the best of times. Now, I'm pretty good at this. My partner, Jeffrey Lyons, who does this TV show with me, has a terrible time remembering titles now, but so many of the movies are so similar. They're so predictable that they begin to run together. I mean, well, for instance, it's a big challenge to remember which Star Trek movie is which. You know, there are now 7 of them. Now, you know, which was the one where they saved the whales? Oh yeah, that's Star Trek 4. So you really, it is a challenge to try to keep these titles straight.
This is sort of everybody's dream job, to be able to go to work, watch a movie, and talk about it. How do you get in this line of work?
Well, first of all, it's not always such a dream job, because what it means is when you go to see Surf Ninjas, or when you go to see Surf Nazis Must Die, another surfer movie which I wasn't terribly fond of, that you can't leave. I mean, you have to keep your bottom side planted in that seat. And it's as if you see a lot of people have this experience when they see movies on an airplane. You can't walk out. I mean, you can take your headphone off, I guess, but here you can't even take your headphone off. And it also means that at times you really stop enjoying movies, because there will be days. Yesterday, it was a 3-screening day. I had to say 3 movies in the same day. and that can be very punishing. So sometimes I think it's a dream job, but sometimes when I'm running from one screening to another and it's a third screening in a day, or when I'm up at 4 or 5 in the morning trying to pound out the review that I have to get in that morning, otherwise there's a blank space in the newspaper, it doesn't seem like such a dream job. To answer your question, my background is I went to college, I went to Yale, I went to Yale Law School. I actually attended law school with Bill and Hillary Clinton, and you can ask me later if they inhaled. But I never thought at that time that I wanted to be a film critic. I was active in the Yale Film Society when I was an undergraduate, but my main interests were writing and politics. And what happened is my first book that was published here in the States ended up being a very big bestseller, and it ended up as a TV series on NBC TV. And through that terrible TV series, and it really was a dreadful adaptation of a very fine book, they asked me at the end of the TV series run to sort of be called in and to look at doing some screenplays, and that led to membership in the Writers Guild of America and working about 3 years doing screenwriting work for various studios and TV projects. And I hated that work, and then sort of began writing about that. Wrote a book called The Golden Turkey Awards about the worst achievements in Hollywood history. And it was really through having worked as a screenwriter and then talking on TV about my book, The Golden Turkey Awards, that I ended up being asked back to talk on TV about new movies, and have been doing that since 1980. The main advantage that a film critic has over a member of the general public is perspective, is seeing a lot of movies, is being able to place a film in the context of other films that it may resemble, other work that the director may have done or the screenwriter may have done. And very often you'll find a member of the public will go out and see a given new film and come out and say, oh, that's the best film I've ever seen. Well, you only see 2 movies a year or 3 movies a year. The average American film goer sees only 2 movies a year. So that's a very big difference from seeing 300 a year. And in a way, that also creates a problem, because film critics tend to be a very jaded group of people who are very tired of seeing the same formulas again and again and again. Film critics tend to give, I think, more praise than is often deserved to films that are novel and different and bizarre. Films like The Piano, which is a film I just was not impressed with at all. I didn't think it was a successful film in any way, and got these rapturous reviews from everybody. I think one of the reasons for that is because it was different. It was from New Zealand. It kept you awake. It was odd. It was self-consciously odd. That kind of film traditionally gets wonderful responses from critics, even though it may not please audiences very much. I can't tell you how many people I've met, civilians, non-critics, who said, what was it with The Piano? I just didn't get it. What was that film? And they were right. And you see, I think what we should remember is that the audience that we work for, we don't work for the studios, we don't work for the big film companies, we work for the public. We're supposed to be telling them what's worth investing their money in going to see. And that audience basically craves 2 hours in the dark where you forget about your problems and maybe come out at the other end feeling better than when you went in. And there's nothing wrong with that.
You've also written a best-selling book called Hollywood versus America. Could you tell us what the book is about?
It's basically about how the entertainment industry has disconnected itself from a very significant segment of its potential audience. That right now, films are made from a very narrow range ideologically. They're made, far too many films are made emphasizing graphic violence and sexuality, despite the fact that the American public has told every survey that they're fed up with this, and has also indicated the same thing in terms of the most important survey of all, which is the box office. In other words, what I'm suggesting, and I think that this is something that the owners of Sony have recently found out to their chagrin, is that the culture of Hollywood here is out of touch with the broader public. And I think, by the way, Sony's mistake was coming in and simply entrusting everything to the indigenous American Hollywood culture, which is so detached from sort of bottom line results, and often becomes involved with its own preconceptions about what should be sold. rather than listening to the public and changes in public taste. One of the points I make in my book is a very simple one, and it's shocking to me that no one ever made it before, which is if you look at the box office performance in the United States of films rated PG and G oriented toward families, as opposed to films rated R that have more explicit sex and violence, the PG and G rated films do much better at the box office. For 15 years, they've been doing better by an average of over 2 to 1, as opposed to R-rated films. And yet 60% of all films are rated R. What sense does that make? R films have less of a chance of being box office blockbusters, of being the top films of the year. They have a much greater chance of being absolute flops. PG and G-rated films are a much more solid investment. Now, the industry is just beginning to wake up to this fact, despite the fact that the statistics have been there for quite a while, if anybody had bothered to put them together.
So you're accusing Hollywood of being bad business people.
Yes, terrible business people. I mean, revolting business people. One clear example is that this is a very religious country. I think anyone who travels in the center of this country, who gets out of New York and LA, will notice what an important force church and synagogue is to Americans. I mean, it's a profoundly important force that 40% of all people in this country go to church or synagogue every week. You never see that in films. And in fact, the only portrayals of religious people tend to be very negative. You know, it's one of those things where there have been, and I've documented it in my book, there have been at least 50 outright attacks on religious believers coming out of Hollywood, one after another. None of them have made a dime. None of them have made a dime. I've had this item in debates that I've had with other critics. Name me one movie of the last 20 years that focuses on a corrupt or crazy clergyman that's made money. And they can't. And yet those movies keep getting made. Now, that suggests an industry that isn't paying attention. You know, keep your eye on the ball. The fact is that movies that are more sympathetic to religious faith tend to do quite well, surprisingly well. A recent example being Schindler's List, which is actually quite attentive and respectful of the Jewish faith. And again, those few movies like Chariots of Fire a few years ago, which had a profoundly affirmative religious message, in that case a Christian message primarily. Chariots of Fire shocked everybody by being a huge box office hit. Witness a few years ago had the same kind of impact. And I think that what it suggests very powerfully is that America is a more traditionally oriented place than the world that's depicted on the TV and movie screens of this country.
What would you say to the average foreign viewer of American films? Are they seeing an accurate portrayal of American life?
What a great opportunity, because this is one of the main reasons I wrote my book, is I have a whole chapter called Exporting Ugliness, where I talk about the image of America and the distorted image of America that's sent abroad. I think that I would tell them the same thing that most foreign travelers feel when they come here, is America's a much happier country than you would think based upon Hollywood's depictions of it. It's a country where families are by and large much happier. I mean, despite the fact that you may have read this in sort of elite journals of opinion in the States and elsewhere, this is not a country where the family is a thing of the past. 72% of all American children, according to the Census Bureau of the United States, live with both their original parents. That's of all children below the age of 18. And that's nearly 3/4. Yes, we have families unraveling to some extent, but 3/4 of Americans still live in quite traditional families. You have a country that is much more concerned about religion, where violence is much less prominent than people would assume. What's so fascinating about this is you look at the surveys, and 3/4 of Americans feel safe in their homes. They think their own neighborhoods are completely safe. And then you ask them about, is the country safe? And they say, oh no. But it's because of the news coverage, because of the focus on murders and mayhem and craziness. Actually, the crime rate in America, the violent crime rate, has gone down the last 3 years. No one knows that because it's so different from what's portrayed in the mass media. It's a country where business is much more respected than you would think from the media. The most common form of murderer on primetime television in America is the businessman. 40% of all murders on primetime TV are committed by businessmen. Now, the fact is that an awful lot of Americans want to go into business and want to succeed with it and respect business success. As you saw, by the way, with the tremendous respect that was accorded to Ross Perot recently when he ran for president. And yet your images of business that are portrayed are constantly negative. The fact is, this is a beautiful country, physically beautiful. There's a tremendous amount of open land, and most people live lives that they themselves describe as very happy. On every survey, about 75% of all Americans describe themselves as either extremely satisfied or very satisfied with their own lives and families.
Is the sexuality depicted in movies an accurate portrayal of American life?
Hardly. There was just a recent study that got a lot of attention here, got the cover of Time magazine, in fact. The best study ever done of American sexual life and sexual practices, done by the University of Chicago. The most massive scientific comprehensive study. And guess what? What it shows is that contrary to what's portrayed on American soap operas on TV, most people have monogamous marriages. Less than 20% of all Americans, husbands and wives, have ever cheated on a spouse. The group in America that has sex most often and is most satisfied with sexuality is long married couples. Single people have miserable sex lives, which is, I guess, when you think about it, is about kind of what you'd expect. But, you know, what you find in the movies is constantly the portrayal of single people is, oh, the only question is, which gorgeous woman am I going to take to bed tonight? Or which gorgeous hunk of man am I going to take to bed tonight? It's not real. It's not real. The fact is that the sort of the sexual varieties, the sexual expectations that are sort of generated by the media are terribly, terribly unrealistic. There's also a great overstatement of gay sexuality. This new study shows that only less than 2% of American adults would describe themselves as either gay or bisexual. And again, they try to filter out to overcome sort of people's natural embarrassment. What this goes to is this figure of 10%, which Americans talk about, has always been nonsense. The only source for that was the Kinsey report, where Kinsey took 1/3 of his respondents were prisoners because they were the only people who talk about sex in 1948. So of course, gay sexuality was somewhat overstated. You know, the one thing that's peculiar about American media and its portrayal of sex is, I've often said that the only kind of sex that you cannot show on American TV is sex between married people. Because the studies that have been done show that the ratio of sexual references on TV to sex outside of marriage as opposed to sex inside marriage are 13-1, which again creates a terribly unrealistic picture of the world.
Some people, some analysts and critics say that your book has changed the way that Hollywood does business. What are some examples of that change?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that the book, along with many other factors, has contributed to a slight change, to the beginnings of what I hope will be an important change. There certainly has been more attention to family entertainment in the last 2 years. And I think that my arguments, backed by, if I may say so, incontrovertible statistics, that family entertainment does better at the box office, have contributed to that. Samuel Goldwyn, one of the pioneers of Hollywood, once said very profoundly, it's always better to sell 4 tickets than 2, meaning that it's obviously better business to have a movie that you can take your kids to rather than forcing the husband and wife to hire a babysitter for those kids. And I think that Hollywood's beginning to learn that lesson. I think I contributed to that. There's also a more sympathetic attitude, ever so slightly, toward religious belief here in Hollywood. Part of that is sort of the recognition that the religion-bashing movies that have been made for so many years just don't do very well. One of the other impacts in terms of the religious sensibility here has been that I happen to be Jewish and I'm religiously involved, but I'm very sort of forthright about that in writing this book, and I talk a lot about what a religious country this is and how that's been an area where Hollywood's out of touch. I think that's contributed to a number of people in Hollywood who are themselves committed to a traditional religious faith to coming out of the closet and sort of allowing that to be known. Right now you have this amazing situation where the #1 rated TV show in America, Home Improvement, is produced by 2 evangelical Christians named David McFadzean and Matt Williams. The #1 rated box office champion in America at the motion picture theaters is The Lion King, which is produced by Don Hahn, who's also a Christian and very unabashed about that. Now that's a different sort of atmosphere than you had before. There are other people producing TV shows like Christie, like a recent show called Against the Grain, Touched by an Angel, all of whom have been very forward about saying, yeah, I go to church, I'm religiously committed. That, it seems to me, is a very healthy thing, and I'm proud of having made some contribution to that. Again, just changing this notion that we have to focus on such violent, dark, cutting-edge entertainment because that's what the American people want. That's what American reality is. I think that my book has changed that psychology. You will no longer hear people in the entertainment industry saying, we need to insert tough language, we need to insert violent scenes, we need to insert sex scenes, otherwise we won't do business. That bit of commonplace wisdom no longer is put forward. You know, one of the things on this whole issue is, does Hollywood reflect America? You know, I often think that the people who pay attention to Hollywood movies and don't travel in this country must think America's 2/3 male, because according to Screen Actors Guild figures, 64% of all speaking parts on television go to men, and 72% of all speaking parts in motion pictures go to men. Now, thank goodness, we are about 50-50 male-female in this country.
I still am confused. Why would movie makers want to make movies that are not going to make money?
Well, they don't. Nobody sets out and says, oh, let's make a movie that's going to be a big bomb and lose our shirts. Nobody says that. They all think they're going to make money. But you see, what people have to understand is that once you've reached a position in this industry where you really have influence and you can greenlight a project and you're a star or a writer or a director who has some clout, you're not worried so much about money. You know, your mortgage is paid for. You've got the money you need. What you're really working for is prestige. And people don't understand and keep forgetting that the most powerful motivator in Hollywood is the respect of your peers. These are terribly, terribly insecure people. You remember a few years ago when Sally Field won the Oscar and she stood out there, so you like me, you really, really like me. Now, this is pathetic. This is a woman who makes $3 million a year or whatever it is, one of the most influential women in the world, and here she is because 5,000 of her friends have elected her in the world's biggest student body election called the Oscars to win this little gold bowled statuette that she's just beside herself. Well, the reason all this is so important to people is because they're insecure. They don't know why they're successful. I mean, after all, you know, you succeed because of the glint of your smile or the curve of your leg, when there are many other people who may be just as pretty and just as talented who are still waiting tables somewhere or parking cars. And so what you need constantly is this reassurance you're doing courageous work. And you see, this is the essence of it, is everybody in Hollywood, even the most airhead, bimbo, nobody, you know, wants to be an artist. You know, nobody says, oh, I'm just a pretty starlet, you know, I'm just used for decoration, or I'm just a muscle man. No, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme sees himself as an artist. Schwarzenegger is an artist, you know, I mean, Chuck Norris is an artist. I mean, and these people all want to be taken seriously as artists. The way you get taken seriously as an artist in Hollywood today is doing, quote, dark, cutting-edge material. Look at the material that's nominated for Best Picture of the Year. I mean, by and large, it is extremely dark, disturbing material. I mean, Schindler's List won last year, but before that it was Unforgiven and Silence of the Lambs, which I think are interesting works, but you know, the nihilistic point of view in both Unforgiven and Silence of the Lambs, I think, is very palpable. And I think they were as much honored for that, quote, courageous, cutting-edge point of view as they were for any excellence in the actual production.
What is your idea of a good movie? What do you look for in a movie?
A good movie is a movie that succeeds in doing what it set out to do. There can be good brainless comedies, which I enjoy. I mean, I'm not one of these people who sees that Marx Brothers comedies are high social commentary. I think they're just, you know, amusing nonsense. And they're brilliant. They're great movies because they succeed in doing that. A movie can succeed in setting out to be a thriller or a horror film or something that frightens people, and be a very good movie if it succeeds in that. I think it's wrong for critics to create sort of a straitjacket, to create one sort of standard of artistic excellence, and then to require that a movie sort of meet that standard in order to win critical praise.
Do you have a couple of your favorite all-time movies?
Everybody does. I mean, in fact, we just saw as a family Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which would be one of my favorite all-time movies. I love It's a Wonderful Life by the same director, Frank Capra. I love John Ford's movies generally. One of my favorites is one that most people don't see called Three Godfathers. It's a gorgeous film with John Wayne. I'm a great fan of Elia Kazan's first film, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which I think is one of the great American films ever made. I think Schindler's List is one of the best films that's ever to come out of Hollywood. I thought Hope and Glory, John Boorman's film from a couple of years ago, was another one of the finest films of recent years. And that would give you, some selection. I'm also a fan, I'll confess it, of Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets, which I think is by far his best film. And, he never quite duplicated the energy or integrity of that film with any of his later work. I think it's a much better film than Raging Bull, which gets more critical attention. I love Casablanca and, a lot of the other. But, one of the things that I must say, Citizen Kane, which is by common consent the greatest American film, I've always found to be an interesting film, but I think it's overpraised. I don't think it's the greatest American film. I don't think you come out of that film feeling richly satisfied in the sense of having spent time with people that you really believe and feel that you've gotten to know intimately. I think that a film like Casablanca, for instance, or Schindler's List for that matter, gives you a richer sense of satisfaction and of having had an emotional experience.
You obviously see a lot of performances by different actors and actresses. What are some of your favorite and least favorite actors and actresses?
Well, not so excellent is easy. Sharon Stone, I don't know why she's a star. I mean, she's very good looking, but my God, there are trees that give better performances than she does very frequently. And Sylvester Stallone, who started out as an interesting actor in Rocky, has really gotten unwatchable. I'd say Sylvester Stallone and Madonna probably together are the worst in the business, though Steven Seagal is pretty bad. Now, in terms of the greatest, we live in an era of great acting. Where it's not just Dustin Hoffman, but Tom Cruise has become a remarkably fine young actor. I happen to think he was great in Interview with a Vampire, a film that I didn't like. Liam Neeson is consistently excellent of today's actors. It's one of those things where generally you will find absolutely brilliant performances. Tommy Lee Jones is phenomenal in Cobb. Tom Hanks, as I think is well known, is about to win his second Oscar in a row. Tom Hanks is consistently good, even in bad movies. Tom Hanks is good. So you're really dealing with Richard Dreyfuss, who hasn't picked very good projects recently and tends to do the same performance every movie. He still does that performance as well as anybody, and is a great actor who I think deserves better roles. It's one of those things where I constantly marvel at how good the acting is, even in absolute garbage. Michael Keaton, is not just a silly man. It's not just Batman. In My Life, he showed what a phenomenal actor he can be. Michelle Pfeiffer is obviously much more than just a pretty face and is a fine actress. And Jessica Lange, who will be nominated for another Oscar for Blue Skies, is a consistently great American actress.
Are there any Japanese movies or actors or directors that you particularly follow or have enjoyed their work?
Well, I have. Of course, everyone follows Kurosawa. And though the later Kurosawa films, I think, have been somewhat problematic, I think Ran was a great film. In fact, I chose Ran as one of the best films of the 1980s. That was his version of King Lear, which is the best version of Lear ever on film. And visually, it's one of the most spectacular films ever made. It's a phenomenal work of art. There's a terrific Japanese film for children released this year, for which my family is grateful, called My Neighbor Totoro in English. And I will tell you, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. They love this movie. They've seen it again and again. It makes them want to visit Japan because it's set in the Japanese countryside, and it's so beautifully animated. And it's about these big, furry, cat-like creatures that help this little girl, and it's a lovely film. My partner and I tried to promote it very heavily on the air. The problem with America is we're so spoiled. We like stories about America, and of course the rest of the world seems to like stories about America too, but it's very hard for Americans to relate to stories set anywhere else. That films made abroad now represent less than 1% of the American marketplace, which is a shame, because obviously there are great films being made in Japan, there are great films being made in France, in England. The English films make it over here, but very few of the others seem to succeed.
If I were to speak to your wife, would she say it's difficult being married to a movie critic?
Absolutely, she would. My wife is a clinical psychologist. She sees patients. She's written 3 books of her own that have been very controversial. Her most recent book is called The Case Against Divorce. And what she would tell you is that if you're going to be married to a movie critic, or for a movie critic, perhaps it's almost ideal to have your own in-house psychologist, because there are so many psychiatric and other problems that come with this job. But somehow it's worth putting up with them. I must say that on balance, I greatly enjoy what I do.
Thank you for joining us.